Finally, after a year, we're ready to put the heads on. Now, Velpro says that you can put these head gaskets on dry. But, you know, I'm old school, and I don't guess you can teach an old dog new tricks. I have to spray head gaskets with copper coat. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. But since we know that we have to take these heads off and change the valve springs after a few minutes of break, we're going to break in the cam, remember? So, yes, I am going to put them on dry. But hopefully everything will work fine. Velpro says it will. Make sure your plug is in there. Make sure you see a little hole there. Can you imagine putting one of those in without the hole? That would not be a pleasant experience. You know, you can't put the studs in now because the Hemi heads, those inner studs, are on about a 5-degree angle, I think. So if you tried to slide the head down these studs, then it hit about right here, and I'll show you on the Keith Black block what I'm talking about. So it wouldn't go on. So you have to put the head on first, and it wasn't a problem in the old days because you used head bolts, street Hemis. We're okay. Let me get a head. That's better, isn't it? Feels kind of poor doing it dry like that, but we'll get over it. I've got the rockers. I need to show you the process on how I try to pre-lube those rockers. It's not. It may not be the right way, but it's the only thing I know to do. I'll get these rest of these studs in here, and then we'll look at the rockers, and I'll show you that part on the Keith Black block I was talking about. Okay, I've got all the studs in. ARP recommends you not to tighten these up all the way in the block, and of course I don't like that. I like the old way where you tighten the studs down. That way every time you try to take the nut off, it doesn't bring the stud up with it. But here's the reason that you have to not tighten the studs. Notice how the stud is sitting in the middle of the hole. Now look at that huge gap there. The whole stud moved over. So you have to do it ARP's way and loosen it up where the stud will come back to the middle. Of course, I have to tell you that in the old days we didn't have that problem. This is a Keith Black stud. It's got a bullet on the end. You can stick it in there and tighten it up, and it doesn't try to walk away on you. I guess what's going on here is when the stud bottoms out against the top of the block, wherever the threads are, it just shifts it over. It ain't easy. So we'll just do it ARP's way, and that way at least we've got the studs in the middle of the hole. So this is what I was talking about on the Keith Black block. So those inner head studs being angled wouldn't, when you have the studs in it, you can't slide the head down because they're going to hit right up here instead of right down here where they're going to eventually land. So by making this hole in this manner, and then it's round at the bottom, where when you get all the way down, it's where it's supposed to be. But that is a nice feature, and of course you couldn't race without it. You know, you can't take off all these bolts or studs, you know. So that's why it's always been that way. It's time to put the heads on, so we have to pre-lube, shall we say, the rocker arms. Stage 5 says the rockers are shipped dry, and it's up to you to figure out how to lube the rollers. Well, I don't know exactly how to do that, but only thing I can think of is hot oil. And we've got 200-degree oil. We'll leave it that way for a few hours and hopefully get some oil between the pin and the roller. That's where we're trying to get. The rest is pressure lubricated. You wouldn't want to do this with the wife at home, because if she catches you with her skillet, there's going to be issues, and you want to try to avoid that. While we're cooking the rocker arms, we can get the rocker stands and shafts cleaned up and ready to put back together. These are the stage 5 instructions. Shipped dry, please lube before use. Lube roller with red Torco MPZ cam lube. Need lube thoroughly to make sure pin is coated inside the roller. Well, you and I know how to knead a wheel bearing. You know, we can get the grease to come out the other side, but I don't know how to get that little roller kneaded in there, and I'm sure they don't have a YouTube video to show us how, and it's nearly impossible to get that guy on the phone, so maybe I'll do that someday though. Don't forget, your number 2 and number 4 stands are what oils the rockers, so that means there has to be an oil passage up here, and there it is. So clean that out, and then one for the other side too, and then that of course makes this an oil passage to feed that, so make sure there's nothing in there. You're supposed to have all this clean anyway, but so be sure on those oil passages. We have a map. Remember when we were centering the rocker arm over the valve stem? So we have a map to put it back together and how many extra shims we need to move that rocker arm over where we want it. And I will get this all cleaned up and then get the rockers and put them back on the shafts, and we'll be closer. Okay, I've got the rockers all assembled. I put them on here hand tight. The rollers all lined up with the valve tips, just like when we mocked it up, and figured out how many shims we needed to center each one, and the map worked. And so, but I didn't do a video of assembling the rockers because I had previously done that. So I didn't want to kind of duplicate that. Now all we need to do is put on all these washers. Remember, you put the washer on dry, and then you need to coat the, you can either coat the, of course you do the threads, and then you can either coat the bottom of the nut or the top of the washer, or a little bit of both. And before you put that on, I think I might just do the nut by hand and slip it on there instead. But I will go ahead and get all this lathered up, and then we will go through the rather unique torque procedure, because we're going to have to use the inside, the little special tool from Snap-on, where we can get onto these inside nuts, and we'll go over that pretty thoroughly because it's a little different. And in case I forget, I torque these last, and these are aluminum stands, so they take a little less. Street Hemi's got cast iron stands, and then they torque to 30, and these are only 25, and just use motor oil on the threads of these. It's not a big deal. All right, I'll get all of this lubed up and get ready to start the torque sequence. Now we come to one of the more complicated things about assembling a 426 Hemi, which is torquing the heads. As you probably have already guessed, there's hundreds of these that have been put together with an air impact wrench in any manner whatsoever, and then they take a combination wrench and they tighten up the inside studs, and the engine probably worked fine and nothing leaked, and it lasted as long as one that's been done correctly. But we already know how to do it wrong. We want to know how you're really supposed to do it. So in the Mopar Hemi engine manual, cast iron block, cast iron heads, stock head bolts. They want you to torque them to 50 and then 75, 2 steps in the proper sequence, which I'm sure is available online everywhere you look. This particular engine, we're using aluminum heads and ARP studs. The Mopar manual says with aluminum heads you final at 70 instead of 75. But the ARP studs want to final at 80, and they want 3 steps, so I would call that 40, 60, and 80. Now, the tricky part, of course, is the inside head studs. As you can see, a normal torque wrench. Actually, I did see some kind of torque wrench that would do those. But you'll probably need an adapter. This is a little snap-on adapter. It's 2 inches long. And if you have the stock inside head nuts, that's going to be a 9/16, and if you're using the 12 point, that's going to be a 1/2 inch, so make sure you buy the right one. The formula, according to the snap-on instructions, I'll simplify the formula. You take the length of the torque wrench, and when they say the length, they're talking about from here to the middle of the grip here. Let's say your torque wrench is 20 inches long, and let's say that your adapter is 2 inches, and all of their adapters are 2 inches to make it easy for math. So they're saying when you added that 10%, you are increasing the torque 10%. So if you torque something with this adapter to 50 pounds, then you're going to get 55 pounds. So you'll have to do the math on your torque wrench. How much longer did this make your wrench? Since in this diagram it was 10%, then we increased the torque 10% here. So if you were trying to torque this to 50, then you would take 10% off of that, and you would torque this to 45 to get the 50 that you were looking for. So that's probably the hardest part about this. I just leave this torque wrench set up to do the insides, and then I use the other torque wrench to do the outside. Actually, my buddy just left. Normally I do this with 2 people because I'm too lazy, and I just tell him which one to hit as we go through the sequence. Now, remember, this has to be sticking straight out. If it's like this, it didn't change the torque because you did not make the torque wrench longer. So now you didn't torque it as much as you thought you did. So when you're torquing, make sure that it's straight out so your calculations work, and that you're torquing the percentage less that this added. So you're always going to be torquing to a lesser number than what it called for. If it called for 45, you would have this set on 41 or whatever, and then that would give you 45 here. So you're going to have to do the math on that and then go through the sequence. So we'll come down, since we're using the ARP studs, we're going to go 20, 60, and 80. We're going to disregard, and you can do that either way. You know, Mopar says 5 degrees less on the final, or 5 pounds less on the final because you're using aluminum heads. But the only car that came with aluminum heads is a 65, and I feel they're a much lighter head than these aftermarket heads that we're using nowadays. I feel these are probably strong enough to take the regular torque, and you know, and of course the 65s used a copper shim head gasket, and we've got composition. So that's the way I'm going to do it. We're going to go through the sequence. We'll go 40, 60, 80, and then after we get done, then we'll tighten these. In this case, these are aluminum, so they'll be 25 instead of 30. Okay, the heads are on. So now it's time to put in the lifters. We need to get some, this is going to be a little messy. You got to get some oil on your fingers. And make sure everything feels really slick in there. And then we need to oil up a lifter. We're trying to make sure it's going to slide good in here. Of course, my hand's blocking your view, but you know what I'm doing. Okay, it feels good. So now we put in all of the lifters. And then, after you get them all in, you pull them back out and dry off the nose of them and brush on some cam installation stuff. I went ahead and rebrushed the cam anyway because it's been a few weeks, and now we're going to put some on the face of the lifter, and then after you get the lifter in, take whatever you're using for assembly lube. I'll be using the half engine oil and STP, and oil the cup. And then we'll also put some on the push rod ball too, just because. We want these things to turn, right? So make sure it's nice and free. Pull it out, put on the cam lube, then put your assembly lube in the cup, and then we'll be ready to put in the push rods and adjust the valves. Okay, I've got all the lifters in. In the next episode, we should be able to wrap all this up. We'll put in the push rods, adjust the valves, pre-lube the oil system, and watch how this flows in here. It's going to be pouring a lot out of the lifters, I'm sure. And wrap this up, fit the intake manifold. We're getting there.